ASB is signaling something uncomfortable. Inflation is still sticky. Neutral might be higher. The economy may have more heat in it than people think. Now, if you're tired of surface level commentary and want structural thinking, subscribe to this channel. We do this all the time. Nick Tuffley joins me, Chief Economist at ASB. He looks like Bruce Willis, moves like an Aikido master, which is appropriate because monetary policy right now is less about force and more about redirection. Nick, if rates were held, what is the part people should be actually uneasy about?
To bear in mind is that if we're holding rates at 2.25%, we do that for a very, very long time. Eventually, the economy will accelerate and accelerate and accelerate. And it's a bit like driving a car. I love a fast car. I like acceleration, but there's a point where it just becomes a little bit too much. And what you get with an economy with low interest rates is after a time, it builds up a lot of speed. You start to get that overheating in the economy. You see asset prices racing away. You see wages racing away ahead of the price increases that businesses can potentially charge. That adds through into inflation, and eventually you basically hit a brick wall. So it's that sort of boom bust cycle. So we learnt, I think, if we go back and think about 2020, 2021, we all loved an OCR at 0.25% and a 2% mortgage rate. But you can see what happens when money is very cheap. Everybody wants to spend it all at the same time on the same things. And you end up with a lot of inflation, and it ends up destabilising the economy. It just overheats. So 2.25% in New Zealand. Look, our viewers, when you're thinking about a Goldilocks interest rate, not too hot, not too cold, 2.25% is on that side where it's starting to heat things up a little bit, just mildly, because you have to admit it doesn't feel like we're in boom times here in New Zealand. But if you left interest rates where they are, eventually your economy is going to hit a pace where we just basically just can't keep up. So the analogy is, if you're running a marathon, you tend to jog that at a steady pace. If you sprint, you basically run out of breath and you have to pause. And if you think about that, an overheating economy is just one where it's just running too fast, and we just don't have the resources to keep up. And eventually it will sort of grind to a halt for a period. So 2.25%, that's sort of really what it means. Do that long enough, the economy will start to sort of overheat, and then you hit a point where things just slow quite markedly. So it's sort of quite boom bust. So here we are, 2.25%. The thing we've got to realise is over time, we probably can't really see interest rates sustaining a level quite that low.
If inflation reaccelerates even slightly, does that force the RBNZ's hand quickly?
We do see inflation just holding up at a uncomfortably high level. Then the Reserve Bank is likely to go, well, actually, is it really appropriate for us to have our foot on the accelerator a little bit? We probably need it on the brake, or at least to take our foot off the accelerator. And that sort of really means taking interest rates from a level which the Reserve Bank would judge as a bit on the stimulatory side to making it a bit more kind of in between that Goldilocks level. The stickier inflation appears, or the more stubborn it is to come back down to closer to 2%, the quicker the Reserve Bank is likely to want to move rates up to that more Goldilocks level.
If this conversation is making you slightly more cautious in a good way, hit subscribe. We have conversations like this each and every week. Nick, are we underestimating how quickly sentiment can flip again?
In this environment, no one's sort of really, I think, taking for granted stability. I don't think we can really take for granted stability. We're going through so much shifts and change, both globally and here. We've had 6 months of, quite a lot of upheaval. The economy works in a different way. People make decisions in a different way. They have sort of different things that they prioritise now. So all that changes our behaviour. And guess what? Look, an economy is just behaviour. It's the sorts of decisions that we make. So people are likely making decisions in slightly different ways. They're probably more or less sensitive to some things compared to in the past. And all that adds up to a period where you're just not quite sure what's the so what for how the economy evolves. How does this influence one part of the economy? How does that influence one part of the economy? So we need to be mindful that we're in an environment where what happens we can't really truly know for certain what's going to happen in a turbulent time. Who knew we'd have tariffs, like 2 years ago? And we do. And when those things pop up unexpectedly, we don't know quite what the full impacts are going to be. So definitely, look, we can't take for granted a period of stability. In fact, it's almost like we need to be getting very good, very agile at adapting to shifting circumstances, and not just let that.
It's unusual when I think back, that Bolger government brought in that between 1% and 3% inflation target for the Reserve Bank. And for so long, really, it was just not a story at all until very recently. It was almost like measles or polio. It had been eradicated from New Zealand. But if inflation does cool cleanly, what specific data will show that decisively?
Or if we're looking at wanting to see signs of inflation itself cooling, we actually do need to look at those figures. Well, what we are fortunate in New Zealand is, at least when we're wanting to look at inflation, is that it's one of the best measured things that we have in this country, and it also comes out relatively quickly. And we're also in time moving to a monthly survey as well. So look, inflation is going to give you that, the inflation figures that we get are going to be a lot more up to date soon, and they do give you that quick read on exactly where the issues are. But the problem, if you're Reserve Bank trying to figure out what interest rates are going to do, you make an interest rate decision now, it can take up to 2 years to impact inflation. So one of the pitfalls about, yes, we know where inflation is right now. One of the pitfalls is, if you're making a decision, knowing what inflation is now is a bit like looking in the rear vision of your car, looking back at what you did 2 years ago. So the Reserve Bank's also having to think ahead about where inflation will be. And that's a really important part of its decision making. So where inflation is now is basically telling it, did I do a good job a year or two ago? But to do its job now, it needs to be looking at where did it see the economy going? Where did it see inflation pressures going? Where did it see wages going? How strong will economic growth be? And factor that in and come up with an inflation view, and then make an interest rate decision at right here, right now.
I thought that was quite interesting what you said there, because am I under the miscomprehension that the CPI is not really world class in working out New Zealand's inflation compared to other countries?
It's reasonably well measured in the sense that it's fairly frequently rebalanced. So our patterns of what we buy change over time. So we're fairly good, say, compared to the US, at updating what we're spending money on. So that's good, but we're only measuring it quarterly, where most countries do it monthly. So that's where there's a difference. So our quarterly CPI is, pretty good value, pretty well done, but you're just getting infrequent snapshots compared to, say, the US. And also Australia has just moved to a monthly CPI. Europe has a monthly CPI, UK, Japan. So we are a bit of an outlier in that regard, but we are moving to that. And that means we are sort of keeping up with the rest of the world. But the challenge of a monthly CPI is New Zealand's a small country, economic news here is pretty volatile, and we'll probably find that monthly CPI bounces around a little bit more. So we'll have to be a bit wary about not overreacting each and every month and thinking that the world's either ended through inflation going through the roof, or we've got to worry about deflation as well. We're going to have to probably, smooth and think about what's happening over a 2 or 3 month period.
How much slack is genuinely left in the economy?
We still think there's a reasonable amount, and look, one thing is, when you go through and look at things like, say, the unemployment rate, it's not a perfect measure of slack, but it's giving you a sense of just how many people are out of work. We've got an unemployment rate sort of like well over 5, something closer to 4.5 is probably a bit more middle of the road. It can go down to low 3s. That's the point where, in effect, we're just really pushing the barrel to find anybody who's reasonably employable at that sort of rate. The other thing is that we've seen in the last couple of years is that people have got what we call a bit discouraged from looking for work, so they've just stopped looking, and they kind of fall out of that definition of being unemployed, because if you're not actively seeking work, you're not counted as officially unemployed. So there's also that sort of hidden number of people there where, as the economy gets better, as job prospects pick up, you'll see people come in and go, okay, I'll start looking for work because it looks like I've got better chances of getting a job. And then there's other things like survey measures of capacity, which basically businesses are saying, in effect, have I got lots of spare capacity or not? And they're still saying they've got a fair amount as well. And most businesses are reporting they don't have a lot of difficulty in finding people when they want to hire. So they're all signs that there's a bit of slack there. And that's one reason why the Reserve Bank seems pretty confident it'll still get inflation down to 2% over the next year or so.
If you value conversations like this that challenge the narrative instead of repeating it, hit subscribe. That's what this channel is for. Nick Tuffley, Chief Economist at ASB. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.